Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Expert for the winning Azure Active Directory strategies for identity, security, and governance. Great to see you this morning and evening for us, and hope that you'll have a great time during this Ask the Expert. Just a quick overview how to engage with the experts. We have a couple here that I'll introduce in a moment. Please use the chat to ask questions. You can go ahead and type them in. They will appear to all the attendees once they've been approved by us as the moderators. And then you can, when you see them, you can go ahead and upvote it and use the like sign to make sure you get your favorite questions answered. We'll try to address as many as we can during this session and also in the chat as well if we don't get to it on screen. Experts will provide resources once the session concludes to learn more. So as a side note for etiquette, this session may be recorded. Please help us. Do not spam or post inappropriate comments in the chat. Please do adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. And finally, here is the Microsoft Code of Conduct. I'll let you take a second to look at that if you haven't already. But again, please uphold the Code of Conduct, and we do not tolerate harassment or discrimination of any kind during this. So let's get started. First, let me introduce you to our two experts. We have the wonderful Nitika Gupta, who is Principal PM Manager for Identity, and we have the amazing Rahul Prakash, and he is also Principal PM Manager in Identity. And so we're going to start off with a couple questions. We're already getting them in. Please go ahead and use this time to start typing in your questions. First, I'm going to start with Nitika. And I'm going to ask you one question that came in. What are some tips for customers who are disabling legacy auth?
Thank you, Melanie. Just a quick introduction about me. As Melanie mentioned, I'm a Principal PM Manager in the Identity team at Microsoft. My team focuses on security, and specifically, we focus on Azure AD Conditional Access and Azure AD MFAs. Going back to Melanie's question, what are some tips for customers to disable legacy auth? To roll out a policy for disabling legacy auth, the first step is to take a look at the sign-ins from legacy auth workbook. That is in the workbook section of Azure AD. The workbook provides you an overview of the users and the applications that are using legacy auth, and that's a great starting point for you. From there, you can start blocking users that do not use legacy auth. And this is the user base that has no impact, so you can go ahead and block legacy auth for them right away. And from there, you can incrementally roll out the policy to the rest of the users. Another tip I would share is that when you roll out a policy incrementally to these users, enable the policy in report-only mode. This will give you the impact of the policy on those users, and you can start sending communications to those users and prepare your help desk to be able to answer any questions. So to summarize, take a look at the sign-in from Legacy Authentication workbook to understand the users and apps using Legacy Authentication. Incrementally roll out conditional access policies to block legacy auth, starting with users that do not use legacy auth right now, and then use report-only mode to make sure you're understanding the impact of the policy along the way as you roll it out. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. That's forgot. Can you hear me? Sorry about that. That's a great place to start with legacy auth. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rahul. So for an organization who's just starting out on their governance journey, what would you recommend that they do first?
Thanks, Melanie. Hey everyone, my name is Rahul Prakash. I'm a program manager in the identity team, and I focus on identity governance and access management. So that's a really good question, Melanie. Like you just saw in the previous session, one of the first things to do is to connect your apps to Azure AD and then bring your users into Azure AD. So we announced cloud provisioning at our last Ignite session last year. We also have connectors to Workday and SuccessFactors and HR tools where you can bring your users, then connect your apps. And once you have this going, that lets you take advantage of all the richness that we have in Azure AD. So once you have your users in Azure AD and your apps connected, the next thing to do is to go turn on many of our features that we've talked about. So Azure AD entitlement management is a great place to start if you are looking for ways to govern access of your employees or guest users or vendors, partners, users from other organizations. Access reviews is a fantastic way to make sure that the access lifecycle is maintained so that users only have access to the things they really need to and should have, and you're meeting your compliance and security goals. And then a thing that gets often overlooked as privileged identity management is the number of global administrators and highly privileged users in your directory. So it's really important to turn on a feature like privileged identity management from Azure AD to make sure that the number of administrators is limited and that when people need access, they only get access at that point in time. So to summarize, that's how to get started. Connect your apps, bring your users, and then go turn on self-service delegation through entitlement management, access reviews, and privileged identity management.
Thanks. Those are some great tips. Now, going back to Nitika, a question came in. Okay, we know about conditional access, but how does conditional access enable remote work?
Thank you, Melanie, again. This is such a relevant question. I think where conditional access comes in play is in the previous world, or the old world, you could have made an assumption that all the users are coming from your company network and you could invest in network-based policies. In the new world that we are all living in, we are working from home, you're working remotely, and you need a policy framework which can look at every aspect of your access, which can look at the user, the risk associated with the sign-in, the app, the data, the device, and the network, and all the richness of that sign-in, and enforce least privileged access for that session, and enforce controls like multi-factor authentication, device compliance. You can require password change or limited access based on the conditions of that sign-in. So you can no longer rely on network-based policies in this world of remote work. We need a comprehensive policy framework that can enforce policies based on all elements and enforce controls. So that's where conditional access comes in play.
Speaking of conditional access, will factor type ever be a configurable option for Azure AD conditional access?
Really good question. So, so far, what we offer in conditional access is customers can require multi-factor authentication during sign-in. And then on the user side, they can use any method that is allowed for their account. In the future, we plan to offer an option where customers can require different authentication assurance levels for a sign-in within conditional access. In addition to the out-of-the-box assurance levels that we will offer, customers can also define and use their own custom authentication levels that can help you meet the specific needs for your organization. So indeed, the answer is yes, we plan to support assurance levels in the future, providing you more granularity beyond just requiring multi-factor authentication.
Thank you. So switching over to talk a bit about Teams, this question was sent earlier. For customers who are rapidly adopting Microsoft Teams, how can we make it easier to govern team membership using Azure AD?
I can take that, Melanie. So that's a really good question. Especially in today's world where we see a lot of collaboration happening online for obvious reasons. What we've noticed is that Teams, there's been a Teams proliferation. Like there's lots of teams being created. There's lots of people collaborating internally in their organization, externally with other organizations, and it's for obvious reasons. Now, when we talk about adoption of Teams and making Teams governance easier, Teams governance is a really wide subject. There's so many different aspects of Teams governance that we could be talking about. For the purpose of this discussion, I'll focus on the membership of Teams because that's where the identity capabilities really shine. Especially, one thing to keep in mind, and many of our savvy customers know this, that a team is an Office 365 group in the background. And Office 365 groups come with a whole bunch of things. It comes with SharePoint sites assigned to it and planners and OneDrive and all this stuff. So it's a really like a full-featured full-featured container. And there's many different tools that are available to you natively in Azure AD and then through our identity governance solution. So some things like there's Office 365 group naming policies that organizations should go turn on to make sure that their groups are adhering to some naming convention. And then you can turn on expiration policies for those groups so that they expire after 6 months unless there's some activity inside the group. And then once those basic things are met, the next step is to go on and turn on Azure AD entitlement management for things like you might want the group membership to be governed in a way where users are requesting access, their access is approved via a certain workflow. You might even have 2 people approving their access before they get access to the team or multiple teams at once. And then you really want their team membership to be revoked at some future point in time, especially if they're users from other organizations. So this is where access reviews really comes in. And we always recommend to customers, many of our customers do this today, is where they use access reviews to continually review the group membership and make sure that people who really need to be in the teams and Office 365 groups, they have that access, and those who don't need to be there anymore are denied, or who are not using Teams, or who just haven't signed into the directory at all, those guests are removed. So to sum it up, there's a lot of stuff that's built into Office 365 group capabilities in Azure AD, and then our identity governance solutions on top of it really make team membership and team governance much easier and richer.
Makes sense. Thank you. So Nitika, back to you. A question about some strong authentication. First of all, what's the latest? Excuse me. What's the latest? We've talked in the winning strategies about strong authentication, and what can people do for Windows login? What are some different options there?
Good question again, Melanie. And this has been a common question we've been getting. And if you think about Windows Logon, you have 2 different options to require strong auth. And good news, both of them are passwordless. The first option for you is to require Windows Hello for Business, which can require a PIN or a biometric gesture on the device itself. The second option that you have is to require FIDO2 security keys, where you can plug in a FIDO key and voila, you are signed in to your Windows machine. So you have 2 great strong authentication options, both passwordless, Windows Hello for Business, and FIDO2 security keys for Windows Logon.
Those are great options. Thank you. So Rahul, another question for you. Governing guest users, so people outside the company, maybe partners, suppliers. What are some best practices for governing those identities?
Yeah, that's a good question, Melanie. There's actually a talk that my colleagues Mark Wall and Elizabeth Olson did. It's available on demand as part of the Ignite offerings. I highly recommend you check that out. They go really deep into Azure AD B2B guest users and how that's used for partnering with other organizations, with vendors and contractors and such. But really, the net of it is that in order to really govern your guest users, there's a certain set of users that you already have, perhaps in your organization already using B2B guest users. And then there's people you want to collaborate with in the future. For users who are already in your organization, you might want to clean up that aspect of making sure that those users who are in the organization still need the access that they have. And for that, access reviews is a really great place to start. Especially if you have sensitive applications, third-party SaaS applications, or if you have sensitive groups, you may want to do an access review on those groups and third-party sensitive SaaS applications to make sure that those are maintained and managed and governed. And for your new users coming in, you would want to consider using Azure AD Entitlement Management, which really allows you to create this thing called access packages, which is a container of groups, it's apps, SharePoint sites. And it really lets you create these containers and then apply these workflows, really governed workflows on top of those containers. So you can make sure that users are periodically reviewed, that their managers have to approve their access before they get access. And the beauty is that you get to connect, in terms of B2B guest users, you can actually specify which organizations you want to collaborate with the most. it's called connected orgs in Azure AD entitlement management. And once you specify those organizations, so take the example if you're a coffee company and you're working with 15 vendors, if each of those vendors is a connected organization, then you don't have to worry about who the guest user is from that organization. You say that you trust that organization, and users from that organization can request access to the access packages you have in your organization. They get access to all the resources, applications, SharePoint sites, you name it. And this just makes sure that those guest users have a purpose for being in your tenant. They are using the services and features that are available, and then when they no longer need it, they are removed. So you always have a clean slate.
Okay, and then just a follow-up on that. You mentioned access packages can be used for guest users. What licenses do people need to have to use access packages?
So access packages is part of our Azure AD Premium 2 offering. Most of our governance features do require Azure AD P2 licenses.
Okay, and one more follow-up. How often do you recommend doing access reviews? Do you recommend doing them quarterly, semi-annually, annually? Any tips on that?
That's a good question. It's interesting. So most of our customers tell us that they use access reviews quarterly and annually. And you'll be surprised the number of access reviews that end on 12/31 of the year, because they're usually trying to get some sort of compliance regulation access review done. But essentially, quarterly and annually seem to be the most common themes. And they're not making these up. Essentially, these come from our regulatory bodies like SOX compliance and HIPAA compliance needs, which is what drive these access reviews, and of course their security needs as well. So I would say quarterly or annually seems to be the going thing. And keep in mind, once you have an access review turned on a resource, the access review stays open for a certain amount of time, because you want to give time to the reviewers to come in and do the access review. You might have a reviewer on vacation or something else, and by giving them that time, and some customers say, oh, I want to do an access review every week. Well, a week might be too short because the person might have been on vacation and not taken any action. So typically the quarterly, annually works pretty well.
That's great, thank you. A couple more questions on conditional access for you, Nitika. So first of all, can people back up, restore, and version conditional access policies?
Thanks, Melanie. This is one of the common asks that we've been getting from customers that are more and more relying on conditional access for their security needs. We recently GA'd generally available the conditional access APIs. As part of the general availability, we also released a set of scripts allowing customers to automate conditional access policy management and build conditional access policy management as part of their business processes. Backup and restore and versioning, as I was saying, are common use cases, and you can find the scripts for those as part of the GitHub package that we have released. And we'll also post the link to the GitHub as on the chat. That way you can easily get to the scripts and try out backup, restore, and versioning within your environment.
Awesome, thank you. And then the other question was, what happens when a sign-in has multiple CA policies attached to it?
Thank you, Melanie. When a sign-in has multiple conditional access policies, we evaluate all the conditional access policies for that sign-in, and we make sure that all the policies are applied before the user gets access to the application. Now, there might be a case where there might be different controls in the policies. So one policy may require multi-factor authentication, another may require a compliant device. So in that case, all the controls need to be met before the user gets access to that application. So in my example, I said one policy had MFA, the other had compliant device. The user needs to make sure they are coming from a compliant device and perform MFA before they get access to the application.
Great, makes sense.
Back to Melanie.
Thanks. Okay, so I have another one about PIM. So Rahul, are there plans in Azure AD PIM to make roles more granular for Office 365 admin roles? For example, they asked, we would like our packaging team to be able to publish apps to Intune without having Intune admin rights and neither have a standing access.
Yeah, we've heard this from customers quite often. They want to be able to do more granular role management in PIM. At this point, the most I can say is it's on the roadmap, and it's things we're working on.
Okay. And another one, maybe I don't know if you can respond on this one as well, but are there any plans to allow access packages to be used on premises?
That's a really good question. So yes, there is. I mean, see, there's ways you could. So for on-premises, essentially you need to write back what we're doing in the cloud onto an on-prem group or an on-prem site. And we do have many customers who say, well, I have this legacy on-prem application that's connected to an on-prem AD group that's synced to the cloud, and I want to go use it. So, well, one answer to that is any group that is synced to Azure AD can be added to an access package. But the problem, of course, comes in when you have to do a group write back, because currently we don't support writing back membership from the cloud to an on-prem AD group. That's on our roadmap in our team, and we're working on it. So you'll probably see, in the near future, you will see something come up where we have more support for on-prem to service the most hybrid customers of ours.
Great, thanks. Nitika, another one for you. As part of Zero Trust, where is Microsoft with continuous access evaluation for the third-party SaaS and custom apps integrated with SAML, OIDC, and some other features like IP rate limiting within conditional access evaluation?
Thank you, Melanie. Good question again. So with just a little more context for everyone on the call, continuous access evaluation allows for instant evaluation of the policies and making sure if a user password is changed or the user goes to high risk, they are prompted for the policy immediately. So with continuous access evaluation, you can make sure that the policy is evaluated in real time. We have released continuous access evaluation with a set of Microsoft apps so far, and we do plan to support non-Microsoft applications as well as provide support for line of business applications that customers build in the future. So short answer, it's definitely on the roadmap. I do not have timelines to share offhand.
Yeah, all right, makes sense, thank you. Rahul, a couple for you. What are the best ways to manage application assignments to make sure that users don't have access that they don't need?
No, that's a good one too. We hear this a lot from our customers, is they want more granular assignment to applications, and they want to be able to manage application assignment. There's a couple of ways you can do that right off the bat. I mean, one of them is, well, after you've connected an application to Azure AD, you should have users either assigned directly to the application or via group membership. Either way you choose, once you have that set up, it's really important to turn on a feature like access reviews to make sure that the membership is always current. Now that's the quick way to just make sure that the membership is current in the application. But another way is to make sure that what happens often when our customers tell us this is that an application might have an owner, or the group assigned to the application might have an owner, and that owner is no longer at the company. And now they don't know who should be giving access to this user to the application and who shouldn't. And they're looking for more of that request approval kind of workflow. And they want to make sure that the users are eventually removed from the application if they don't need the application. They want business justifications and all that. So that's where the Azure AD entitlement management comes back into play with its access packages, and you can add one or multiple applications to the access package, and then make sure that the users get access only to the applications they need. there's a workflow associated with it, etc. But even beyond that, it's really important to make sure that the users who are owners of the group that is giving access to the application, typically we're so used to this where we have owners having standing access as owners of those groups, so they can add anyone to those groups. And it's often where if I need access to an application and I know the person who manages the group, I might just go ask that person directly. And it happens in organizations. So the way to ensure that owners of the groups only get access when they need is to use one of our new features that we have called privileged access groups. And what this lets you do is have just-in-time access to either be a member or an owner of a group. So if you have someone who might be the owner of the person who's maintaining access to the Salesforce application, and there's a group that's giving access to the Salesforce application, the best practice here would be that owner must request access to be an owner of that group through privileged access groups. That person must go through the workflow that's associated with PIM, must MFA, there must be a proper business justification in there. And only after all those checks, this person gets time-limited access to make modifications to that group and therefore access to the application. And by the way, there was a really good I believe it was Jasmine, one of my colleagues who had an Ignite session on application management, Jasmine and Luis, and that's really a good one. We should, that can also be really good for our viewers to see.
So sorry, we're close on time, but I just wanted to ask a couple more questions. So Rahul, governance still requires some work on part of the admin. Is there anything you're planning to do to automate governance processes?
Yeah, actually, so there's a lot of work that's been that we've already done, and more that's coming. We believe that there's this concept of attestation fatigue, for example, where reviewers who are reviewing access are used to just rubber stamping access approvals, and it happens at every company. There's work we've already done where we provide these smart recommendations and access reviews where we tell you whether to approve or deny a user based on our knowledge of whether that user signed into the application or signed into the directory. So that's one step into making more automation and more alerts. And also on the privileged identity management side, we also provide alerts where we tell you which users are assigned privileged roles and which ones of them haven't activated their privileged roles in 30, 60, 90 days or 6 months. And it's those kinds of more alerts and automation and techniques that you can use to make your life a lot better in terms of governance. And you'll see over time just more automation being added into governance processes to make it just far more easier for customers. Melanie, I think the mic's off again. There you go.
Sorry about that. I think we have time for one more. So Nitika, one for you. Question. Will factor type ever be a configurable option for Azure AD conditional access?
Good question. We talked a little bit about this earlier, where I think our current level of granularity is customers requiring multi-factor authentication within conditional access. And what we've heard customers ask us for is they want to require not just multi-factor authentication, but they want to require different assurance levels for an authentication. So if you're accessing a very sensitive app, you want to make sure the user is using phishing-resistant credentials like Windows Hello for Business or FIDO2 keys. So in the future, we plan to support custom authentication assurance levels in conditional access, where customers can define what is the assurance level the user needs to meet before they get access to the application. So absolutely, we want to extend the notion of multi-factor authentication to assurance levels. In addition to out of the box, customers will be able to define custom ones for their environment.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you so much, both of you, our experts, for answering all these great questions about winning strategies for identity. And thank you all for joining us.